On my 58th birthday, my husband brought me a gift I will never forget, the family he had hidden for 30 years. And yes, I smiled, but not for the reason he thought. The day started like so many others, wrapped in the soft lies of routine. I woke up to the smell of coffee drifting down the hallway, that familiar dark aroma that has signaled morning in our home for decades. In the kitchen, I could hear cupboards opening and closing, the low clatter of cups, his off-key humming of some old song he always sings when he's trying too hard to seem relaxed. A moment later, he appeared in the bedroom doorway carrying a tray. Coffee, 2 slices of toast cut into neat triangles, and a single pink rose in a small glass. He'd never been a grand romantic, but he liked little gestures, the kind that look good in photos. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice overly bright, as if he'd swallowed the sun and now didn't quite know what to do with all that light. I pushed myself up against the pillows and pretended not to notice how his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "You're up early," I teased. "You remember how to work the coffee machine?" He laughed, but it came out tight. "For you, I'll remember anything." He set the tray on my lap and leaned down to kiss my forehead. His lips landed there, warm but a little hesitant, like he was greeting a distant relative, not the woman he'd slept beside for 3 decades. His hand brushed my shoulder and then disappeared quickly, as if he'd touched something fragile he was afraid of breaking. "You didn't have to do this," I said, wrapping my fingers around the warm cup. "You know I don't like a fuss." He replied, straightening the corner of the blanket that didn't need straightening. "I know, but this year is special." The word hung between us. Special. It tasted like something too sweet, covering up a bitter aftertaste. I took a sip of coffee to buy myself a moment. It was a little stronger than I usually make it, just enough to jolt my nerves instead of soothe them. His gaze flicked to his phone on the nightstand, then away. He'd turned the screen face down, an old habit that I had once ignored and now noticed too often. "What have you done?" I asked lightly. "Please tell me you didn't invite half the neighborhood and that ridiculous cousin of yours." He chuckled, but his fingers tightened around the tray. "No, nothing like that. Just something I should have done a long time ago." He cleared his throat. "You'll see." "You'll see." Another phrase that should have been exciting, but made a chill crawl slowly up my spine. I smiled at him and pretended not to feel that chill. That's what we, as wives, as mothers, as women, become experts at. Pretending not to feel the draft from the cracks in our own walls. He went off to shower and dress, humming louder now, and I sat there with my coffee, staring at the steam as it curled and vanished into the air. My birthday, 58. Old enough to know that special surprises rarely arrive without a price. All morning the house felt wrong, too tidy, too quiet. He'd insisted on cleaning the night before, wiping down already clean counters, dusting shelves I'd dusted the day before. Today, he moved from room to room, rearranging cushions, straightening picture frames, pausing every few minutes to check his phone. Whenever I caught him, he'd pretend to be adjusting his watch instead. "Expecting someone?" I finally asked as he passed the living room window for the 4th time. He stopped, hand resting on the curtain. "Well, yes, later." His smile was quick, strained. "You'll like it, I promise." He'd missed my birthday dinner 3 years in a row before this one. Work emergency, traffic, a client needing him. I'd eaten cake with our children while his empty chair watched silently. I told myself men are like that. They provide, they get busy. We make excuses for the people we love. We stitch together their gaps with our understanding until we can't tell where their choices end and our denial begins. I brushed a speck of dust from the edge of a frame, though there wasn't any. "As long as you're here this time, that's enough of a gift." For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt? Sadness? Fear? It was gone almost as soon as it appeared. "I'm here," he said, "really here." The clock crept toward afternoon. Sunlight pooled on the living room floor, warming the rug where our children used to sprawl with their toys. I caught sight of their younger faces in the photos on the wall. 2 kids, 1 boy, 1 girl, all small teeth and scraped knees and birthday candles blown out with eyes squeezed tight shut. Our little family. Or so I'd thought. "Do you want me to set extra plates?" I asked as I folded a dishcloth in the kitchen. "Are the kids coming?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just a tiny pause, but enough for a seasoned wife's heart to catch it. He said, "Maybe later. First, there's something I need to do. Just trust me, okay?" Trust me. I gave him a soft nod, but inside, those words landed on a pile of other trust me moments that suddenly felt heavier than they ever had before. By 3 o'clock, my nerves thrummed under my skin. My hands moved on autopilot, arranging the flowers he'd bought, a cheerful mix of lilies and roses in a vase. The scent was almost too strong, cloying. I changed my blouse, then changed it again. I told myself I was being silly. It's just a birthday. Maybe he planned a surprise visit from an old friend, or a small party, or one of those things husbands do when they're trying to make up for past absences without having to talk about them. At 3:14, right as I was wiping an invisible stain on the countertop for the 3rd time, the doorbell rang. The sound was so ordinary it almost mocked me, that soft chime that had introduced so many everyday moments. Packages, neighbors, our children returning home, my sister arriving with a bottle of wine and gossip. But that day, it sliced through the house like a blade. My husband's head snapped up, his face drained of color, then flushed. He wiped his palms on his trousers, even though they weren't wet. "I'll get it," I said, before he could move. He caught my wrist gently. "Wait," he murmured, then let go. "Just be patient, okay? Whatever happens, you deserve the truth." Truth. I heard nothing else after that. Not the second half of his sentence, not the nervous swallow that followed, just that one word echoing inside my chest. I realized, in that moment, how rarely that word had truly existed between us. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the house as I walked toward the door. I could feel the chill slipping through the cracks, brushing goosebumps across my arms. Each step sounded too loud on the wooden floor, like I was walking into some courtroom I hadn't agreed to enter. The doorbell rang again, shorter, sharper this time. "I'm coming," I called out, though my voice didn't sound completely like my own. My fingers hovered on the doorknob for just a second. A ridiculous thought flashed through my mind. I could turn around, refuse to open it, pretend nobody was home, but the thing about truth is it doesn't go away just because you let it ring outside. I turned the knob and pulled the door open. 3 strangers stood on my doorstep. The first was a woman around my age. Her hair, once probably dark brown, was now shot through with gray, pulled back into a simple bun that exposed a tired but dignified face. She wore a modest blouse and skirt, the kind you choose when you want to look neat without drawing attention. Her hands clutched a plain handbag in front of her, fingers tightened around the straps as if she needed something solid to hold on to. "Hello?" I managed, my voice threading its way through the cold air. The woman opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes flicked past me, into the hallway, searching. Behind me, I heard my husband's footsteps, slow, reluctant. I didn't turn to look at him. Instead, I watched the way the young man's shoulders tensed and the young woman's lips pressed into a thin line when they heard those footsteps. He came to my side, close enough that I could feel the tremor running through him. For once, his presence didn't comfort me. It felt like standing next to a stranger who wore my husband's skin. "Come in," he said softly to them. Don't stand out there." I turned my head to look at him. His face was pale, eyes glossy, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment in his mind and now couldn't remember the lines. He wet his lips, then glanced at me. "Anna," he addressed the woman. The name rolled off his tongue with too much practiced ease. Wife. The word sounded thin, like an old coat he was suddenly aware he'd been wearing for too long. Then he gestured awkwardly between us. "And this," his voice faltered, "this is my other family." For a second, the world tilted. It was as if I'd been standing in a quiet room and someone had suddenly turned off all the sound. I saw his lips move. I saw the way the woman, Anna, flinched slightly. I saw the young man's jaw tighten and the young woman's eyes drop to the floor. But I heard nothing except that echo of that.
Before I tell you what was inside that box, you need to understand the 30 years that came before it. It's easy, from the outside, to say, "I would have known," or "I would have left." But love doesn't start with lies. It starts with softness, with little moments that make you feel chosen. That's how it was with us. I met him in the most ordinary way, at work. I was 27, a junior accountant in a small manufacturing company. My life back then was simple: a rented room, a bus pass, a worn handbag, and a head full of my parents' old-fashioned advice. My father believed in hard work and modest living. My mother believed in loyalty. "If you're lucky enough to find a good man," she used to say, "you build a life with him. You don't just walk away at the first storm." He was the new operations manager, confident, a little too loud for my taste at first, with a shirt always neatly pressed and a watch that looked a bit too expensive for his position. He had that rare skill of making everyone in the room feel like they mattered. The security guard, the cleaning ladies, the directors. He greeted them all with the same easy smile. The first time he really looked at me was over a broken printer. I was standing there, smacking the side of the machine like an idiot, and he appeared at my elbow with a half smile. "Violence doesn't work on printers," he said. "Trust me, I've tried." I laughed, embarrassed. "It doesn't respond to kindness either, apparently." He crouched down, fiddled with the paper tray, and in a few seconds, the thing whirred back to life. He dusted his hands off on his trousers like he'd just fixed a car. "There," he said, "you just needed someone who speaks fluent printer." Something about the way he said "someone" made my cheeks warm. It wasn't flirtatious exactly, just kind. And after years of being invisible in a gray building full of paperwork and ringing phones, kindness felt like sunlight through a dusty window. He started appearing more often, not in a pushy way, just there, asking if I wanted coffee when he went to get his, leaving a note on my desk, "You survived Monday, congratulations," with a small chocolate next to it. Walking me to the bus stop in the evenings if we finished late. "You shouldn't go alone in the park," he would say, hands in his pockets, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to care where I was going. At home, my mother watched me carefully. "He looks ambitious," she commented, once after meeting him at a company party. "Ambition is good, as long as it doesn't swallow his heart." I brushed it off. All I saw, back then, was a man who made me feel safe, seen, even special. He listened when I talked, really listened, not just nodding, but asking questions about my family, my dreams, the little things that annoyed me. I told him I wanted a marriage like my parents, steady, loyal, not perfect, but dependable. He nodded like he understood. That's what I want too. A home, a family, no games. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We got married 2 years later. It was not a fairy tale wedding by Instagram standards, but it was beautiful to me. A small church, white lilies lining the aisle, my mother dabbing her eyes in the front pew. My dress wasn't designer. It was sewn by my aunt, with lace she had carefully saved for years, for something special. I remember the feel of it against my skin. Slightly rough, but comforting, like tradition wrapping itself around me. He stood at the altar in a navy suit, hands clasped, eyes fixed on me as if I was the only person in the universe. When my father placed my hand in his grip was firm and warm. "Take care of her," he murmured quietly, his voice thick. "She's never been good at leaving when she's hurt." "I will," my husband promised. "She's my life now." We said our vows, the usual words everyone says, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, forsaking all others. I repeated them with the sincerity of someone who never considered that they might become optional. When the priest said, "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," I felt a kind of solemn joy. I was not alone anymore. We were a we. The early years were not easy. We lived in a small apartment with peeling paint and a bathroom that hissed whenever anyone showered. Money was tight. We argued about little things, bills, overtime, groceries, but we always ended up laughing it off. He worked hard, sometimes late into the night. I took on extra work where I could, doing colleagues' paperwork at home, trying to ease the burden. "Someday," he'd say, lying beside me in bed, staring at the ceiling, "I'll get us a house, a proper house, with a garden. You'll have flowers and we'll have a room for each child." Each child. He always spoke in plurals. It made the future feel full. When our son was born, he cried harder than the baby. "He's perfect," he kept repeating, kissing my forehead, my hand, our son's tiny fingers. He took a week off work, changing diapers clumsily, walking the floor at night, singing lullabies in that off-key way that used to make me laugh. "Look at us," he grinned at 3 a.m., hair a mess, shirt stained with spit up. "We made a person." A few years later, our daughter arrived, all fierce cries and wide, dark eyes. He held her like glass. "My princess," he whispered. "Now I have everything." From the outside, it looked like we had it all. The house he promised, a small garden where I planted roses and tomatoes, 2 healthy children, holiday photos and matching sweaters. I learned his moods, his rhythms. I knew how he liked his tea, how he scratched his left ear when he lied about small things like whether he'd eaten the last piece of cake. The first red flag appeared, quietly, no drama, just a small change in the background of our life. He started working later. At first it made sense. "The company is expanding," he said. "More responsibility, more pressure. This is good for us." And it was true. The promotions came, the salary increased, the car got newer, the house bigger. Late nights became part of our routine. I tucked the kids in alone, sat in the living room with the TV on low, listening for his key in the lock. Sometimes he'd call. "Don't wait up," he'd say. "We're having drinks with the client." In the background, I'd hear laughter, clinking glasses. I told myself this was what success looked like. Men who provided had long days. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "Be grateful he's working, not out running the streets." He bought me gifts more often during those years. A necklace I hadn't asked for, a scarf that didn't quite match my usual style. "Just because," he'd say when I asked why. "You deserve nice things." I took it as love. I didn't consider it might also be guilt. There were phone calls, too. Calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. The screen turned face down on the table. "Work," he'd say, waving it off. "You don't want to hear about budgets and reports, trust me." And I did trust him. Or maybe I trusted the life we had built more than I trusted my own discomfort. Sometimes late at night when he was in the shower, I'd hear his phone buzz on the nightstand. My hand would twitch, tempted to pick it up, to confirm or destroy the quiet peace I had wrapped myself around. My heart would pound in my throat, and I would sit on my hands instead. "Don't be that kind of wife," I'd scold myself, the paranoid kind. Love means trust. Besides, if you look, you have to be ready for what you might find. And I wasn't ready, not then. Culturally, in my generation, a good wife didn't pry. She kept the home running, raised the children, accepted that men needed their space, their secrets, their boys' nights. Divorce was whispered about, never celebrated. Women who left were pitied or judged.
Women who stayed were praised for their endurance. So I stayed, and I endured. There were other little things. A shirt that smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He laughed it off. "You know how crowded the trains are," he said. "Some woman must have bathed in this stuff." I wrinkled my nose, joined in the joke, and opened the window to let the air clear. Once, about 30 years ago, before our daughter was born, he disappeared for 2 days. He called to say his boss needed him for an urgent, out-of-town project. "It's chaos here," he shouted over the noise in the background. "I don't have time to explain. I'll be back Sunday night. I love you." Sunday night came and went. No key in the lock, no call. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the silent phone, my mind spinning through every possible explanation. Car accident, robbery, hospital. Not infidelity, though. I wasn't ready to let that possibility into my vocabulary. He came home Monday at dawn. I heard the door click, the soft sound of his shoes on the hallway floor. I got up, heart pounding, and stood in the bedroom doorway as he walked in. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy. There was a bruise on his jaw, small and yellowing. And there was a smell. Faint, floral, not mine. A perfume I didn't recognize, mixed with the stale scent of cigarette smoke. "What happened?" I asked, my voice half-whisper. He froze for just a moment. It was so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking straight at him. Then he exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Don't be angry," he said, dropping his bag. "The boss, he made us stay. Clients from a..."
For a few moments after he said the words, "my other family," the world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing. Silence stretched in the hallway, a thin, brittle thing that could snap with the slightest wrong word. The 3 people on my doorstep stood frozen, like actors who had forgotten their lines. Behind me, my husband hovered, half in shadow, as if he wasn't sure which side of the threshold he belonged on. Up close, the woman, Anna, looked even more tired than I'd first noticed. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind carved by years of waiting and compromising. Her eyes met mine for a second, and in that brief glance I saw a whole dictionary of emotions: defensiveness, guilt, and something that surprised me, hope. A small, flickering, almost shameful hope, as if she was wishing this confrontation would finally free her from something too heavy to carry alone. The young man stood slightly behind her left shoulder, tall but trying to make himself smaller. His hands were thrust deep into his pockets, his shoulders angled away as if he were ready to turn and bolt at any moment. He glanced at me, then quickly looked past me, at the wall, the ceiling, anywhere but my face. His jaw worked, as though he were grinding words between his teeth and swallowing them down. The young woman hovered close to Anna's right side, one hand lightly brushing her mother's elbow every few seconds, as if to reassure herself that she was still there. Her eyes flickered around, taking in the hall table, the framed family photos on the wall, the vase of birthday flowers. When her gaze finally met mine, it held for a heartbeat, a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and a quiet, reluctant respect. Then she too looked away. I could feel the tension coming off them in waves. They weren't intruders striding confidently into stolen territory. They were people dragged into the light after years in the dark, blinking and unsure of the rules. My husband cleared his throat behind me. "This is Anna," he said, the name sticky on his tongue now. "We've known each other since before we married. We," the word hit me like a slap. We, as if I were still included in that simple, soft pronoun. As if our marriage and his other life could coexist peacefully inside that little word without tearing it apart. "And these are my children," he added, gesturing with a stiff hand toward the 2 young adults. "My children, not ours. Not mine. Just his."
For a second, jealousy flared so hot inside me, it made my fingertips tingle. How many birthdays of theirs had he missed to be with me? How many of mine had he ruined by being busy with them? The woman, Anna, shifted uncomfortably, her bag strap biting into her palm. She took a small breath, then spoke, her voice soft and careful. "I didn't want to come like this," she said, eyes finding mine again. "If it were up to me, I would have done it differently, or not at all. But he said you deserved to know." Deserved to know? It was almost laughable. I wondered at what point in the last 30 years he decided I deserved the truth. Before their son was born? Their daughter? After his first Christmas with them? The 10th? Or only now, when the weight of his double life became too heavy for him to carry, when the guilt finally threatened his comfort? The young man shifted, clearing his throat. "We didn't know about you," he murmured, his eyes still fixed on some invisible spot on the floor. Not like this. Not until recently." The young woman nodded slightly, adding in a small, strained voice, "We knew he was married, but we didn't see this." Her gaze swept over the hallway, the polished shoes lined neatly by the wall, the framed graduation photos, the little wooden key holder our daughter had made in school. When her gaze finally met mine, it held for a heartbeat, a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and a quiet, reluctant respect. Then she too looked away. I could feel the tension coming off them in waves. They weren't intruders striding confidently into stolen territory. They were people dragged into the light after years in the dark, blinking and unsure of the rules. My husband cleared his throat behind me. "This is all my fault," he blurted suddenly, his voice hoarse. Don't blame them. Anna and I, we were together before you. She got pregnant. It was complicated. My parents, her parents, nobody agreed on anything. I thought it was over. I thought..." He stopped, as if even he couldn't listen to his own justifications anymore. I heard the words, but they slid off me like rain on glass. What caught my attention instead was a small detail on the young man's wrist. A cheap bracelet with a faded blue thread and a little silver charm. A charm I recognized. I had seen it once in a photograph, years ago, tucked between papers on his desk. A picture of a little boy at a park, holding an ice cream cone, that same bracelet gleaming on his chubby wrist as he grinned at the camera. When I asked who it was, my husband shrugged, barely looking up. "Oh, that?" he said. "Just my colleague's kid. He left the photo on my desk by mistake. Cute, isn't he?" And then he took the photo and slipped it into his briefcase. I believed him. Or rather, I chose not to poke at the uncomfortable knot in my chest. Now, as I looked at the young man, wearing that same bracelet, older, taller, but with the same cleft chin and the same shape of eyes, I felt something inside me click into place like a puzzle piece that had been missing for years. So much of my life, it seemed, could be traced back to that. Things I almost questioned, almost confronted, almost understood. I took a slow breath, feeling the chaos inside me swirl. Anger, betrayal, humiliation, curiosity, and that strange, stubborn thread of compassion that refused to be cut. From the outside, it might have looked like a simple scene: a wife, a husband, another woman, 2 children, standing in a neat hallway on a sunny afternoon. But under the surface, 30 years of lies and half-truths burned quietly, threatening to ignite. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my own history settle around me like a cloak. I could fall apart later, in my own time, in my own way. But right now, in this house I had cleaned and decorated and filled with memories, I refused to let my pain turn me into something small and hysterical for them to pity. I cleared my throat. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we can't have the truth standing in the hallway like unwelcome guests." All four of them looked at me startled. "Come in," I continued, stepping back to make room. "It's my birthday after all. We should celebrate that the truth has finally decided to show up." They moved forward hesitantly, their bodies brushing past me as they crossed the threshold. I could feel their nervous energy, their shame, their uncertainty, like static in the air. As they closed the door behind me with a soft click, I thought to myself, if I was going to lose my life as I knew it, I would lose it with my head held high.
We settled in the living room like strangers waiting for a delayed train, sharing a destination we hadn't chosen. Anna and the two young adults sat together on the sofa, close but not quite touching, as if each was afraid to lean too hard on the others. My husband took the armchair opposite them, his usual spot when he watched television in the evenings, only now he looked horribly out of place. I sat on the smaller chair near the coffee table, the one I used when I folded laundry or spoke on the phone with our children. On the kitchen counter behind me, the birthday cake sat untouched, its unlit candles like tiny, silent witnesses. I could still smell the sweetness of the frosting, the faint hint of vanilla hiding beneath the heavier scent of tension that filled the room. No one spoke at first. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, counting out seconds that felt like years. My husband cleared his throat, his eyes darting briefly to mine and then away, landing on the flowers, the carpet, the far corner of the room, anywhere but the people whose lives he had split in two. "I don't even know where to start," he muttered. "Try the beginning," I said quietly. He winced, as if my voice were sharper than I intended. He rubbed his hands together, then rested his elbows on his knees, hunched forward like a man awaiting a verdict. "Anna and I," he began, glancing at her, "we knew each other before I met you." The words fell into the room, dull and heavy. I stayed very still, listening. It struck me that in 30 years of marriage, I knew the story of his career, his childhood, his parents' illnesses, the stories he chose to tell, but I had never heard this one, not like this. "We grew up in the same neighborhood," he continued. "Our parents knew each other. We started seeing each other when we were young, too young to understand anything properly." He gave a humorless laugh. "We saw it love alone was enough." Anna's hands twisted together in her lap. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "We were together for a few years," he went on. "Then things got complicated. My parents didn't approve. They wanted me to focus on my studies, my career. They said she wasn't suitable." At that, Anna's head snapped up, eyes flashing with an old hurt. "That's not what they said," she cut in quietly. "They said I wasn't good enough. Don't soften it now." He flinched, but didn't argue. "I was stupid," he said. "I let them get into my head. I pulled away. I told myself I needed to think about my future, that we were young, that we would figure it out later." He paused, swallowing hard. "And then," he said, "she told me she was pregnant." Silence fell over the room again, thicker now, weighted with that single word. I looked at Anna, really looked. I saw it then, the echoes of a younger woman in her face, the one who had once stood where I was now, heart full and uncertain, clutching a man's promises like a lifeline. "Everything exploded," he continued. "Our parents, they fought, accused, insulted. There were talks of marriage, of moving in together, of me dropping everything and choosing. I panicked. I felt trapped. I told myself I wasn't ready. I told myself we'd ruin each other's lives if we rushed." Anna's voice came out sharp and brittle. "You told me you loved me," she said, eyes blazing now. "You told me you would marry me anyway. You promised you'd talk to them. You promised you'd stand up for us." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." "You promised you'd tell her," she added, turning her gaze toward me. "Later, when it was convenient, when the children were older, when things were stable." Her lips trembled, but her voice did not. "You promised you'd choose."
The young man shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," he murmured. "No," she said, shaking her head. "He needs to hear it. She needs to hear it too. He didn't just wake up one day with 2 families by accident. He built this, brick by brick." My husband's shoulders sagged further. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "When I met you," he said, turning toward me, "we had broken up. Or at least that's what I told myself. We'd had a big fight. Her parents had insulted mine. My mother had said terrible things about her. And I walked away. I threw myself into work. I told myself it was over." He took a shivering breath. "And then you came into the picture," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine for a second. "I remember those days, the broken printer, the chocolates, the walks to the bus stop. The warmth I thought we were building from scratch, not picking up from the ashes of something else. I didn't think I was hiding anything then," he insisted weakly. "I thought that chapter was finished, that I could start again. I convinced myself I had the right." "And I?" Anna asked in a low voice. "What did I have?" He didn't answer her. "When our son was born," she continued for him, turning to her children, "he came to the hospital trembling, holding flowers like an apology. He said he'd made a mistake, that he'd been pressured, that he'd fix it. He held you," she looked at her son, "and he cried. He said he'd be there for us, even if we couldn't be official." The young man's jaw clenched. He didn't look at either of his parents. "I was already married by then," my husband said, looking down at his hands. "We had just started our life. The apartment, your job, our plans. And she had his baby. I was torn. I felt important, I thought. The word bitter. Powerful. Wanted. Not torn enough to be honest. I told myself I could take care of everyone," he went on, the phrase tumbling out. "I didn't want to lose you or them." He said take care of as if we were plants in 2 different gardens, not people with hearts and futures. As if we were responsibilities, not relationships. "I thought I could make it work," he said. "Provide for both families, split my time, be there as much as possible. I told myself, if nobody got hurt, then maybe it wasn't so bad." The young woman let out a humorless laugh. "How did that work out?" she asked coldly. I told you," he said to me, his voice cracking. "I honestly did. I thought I'd wait until the right moment, until the kids were older, until things calmed down. But there was never a right moment. Birthdays, illnesses, school events, promotions. There was always something." I sat very still, listening to the way he used time as an excuse. "Until" became a cage he built around all of us. My right to know was weighed against his comfort, and every time his comfort won. "Every year it got harder," he continued. "The longer I waited, the worse it seemed to tell you. I imagined your face, your pain. I was a coward, so I kept postponing my right to decide what kind of life I wanted, postponing their right to be acknowledged fully and openly, postponing his own reckoning." Anna shook her head slowly. "You didn't just postpone," she said. "You lied. You lied to her," she nodded at me, "by omission, by secrecy, and you lied to us by promise. You told me, soon. You told the children, one day, you'll meet my friend. It will all make sense. One day, one day, one day. 30 years of one day?" "So you were my shame," the young man said suddenly, his voice low and sharp. "Not your family, your secret." His words sliced through the fragile explanations like a knife. My husband's gaze shot to his son. "No," he protested, desperate. "Never shame. I was proud of you. I am proud of you. I just didn't know how to be a decent human being," the young woman finished for him,
her eyes glittering with tears. I watched all of them, feeling like I was standing at the center of a spiderweb of dishonesty, every thread leading back to him. Each person in that room had been denied something vital by his choices. I had been denied informed consent, the right to say yes or no to a life with a man who already belonged somewhere else. Anna had been denied legitimacy, forced to walk in shadows. Their children had been denied the simple dignity of having a father who could introduce them without hesitation. And he had denied himself the chance to be honest, perhaps out of fear that honesty would not let him have it all. My mind drifted back, unwillingly, over the timeline he was describing, all those late nights, all those urgent projects, the working weekends and client dinners, the holidays he claimed he couldn't schedule time off. Every time I'd held his empty side of the bed with my hand and told myself, he's working so hard for us. Us. Which us had I been imagining, and which us had he been serving? What is love if it is built on lies? I wondered silently. Is it still love if the person who says I love you is splitting their heart into compartments, offering each part a different story?
The box looked almost ridiculous sitting there in my hands. Plain brown paper, corners slightly softened with time, tied with a thin white ribbon that had once been straight and crisp, now a little wrinkled. It could have held anything. Old letters, family photos, a forgotten gift. No one in that room could have guessed that inside that small, ordinary box lived 30 years of the truth my husband thought I couldn't handle. My hand trembled just a little as I held it, but my voice, when I finally spoke, was steady. "You're not," I said quietly, looking straight at him, "the only one who kept a secret in this house." His fingers tightened around the armchair. "What is that?" he asked, his voice strained. I took a few steps forward and placed the box gently on the coffee table, right in the center between him and the sofa where Anna and the children sat. It sat there like a neutral judge, equally distant from all of us. "This," I said, laying my palm on the lid for a moment, "is 30 years of the truth you thought I couldn't handle." The room seemed to shrink around us. I could feel their eyes on the box. His, wide, confused, suddenly fearful. Anna's, curious, wary. The young man's and young woman's, anxious, as if they were once again watching their father balance on a tightrope, waiting to see which way he would fall. "You knew?" Anna whispered, the words barely audible. "I suspected," I replied. And then, slowly, I stopped just suspecting. My fingers traced the ribbon, and as I did, my mind drifted back to the beginning. Back to the first time a question came into my life and refused to leave quietly. It started with a phone bill. Almost 15 years into our marriage, back when bills still arrived on paper, I remember sitting at this very table, the afternoon light slanting across the page. I was checking the totals, making sure we weren't overspending, when I noticed a cluster of calls to a number I didn't recognize. Always the same one, late at night, early in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day from his office line. I frowned, pen hovering over the bill. I circled the number absent-mindedly, thinking maybe it was a client, a supplier, but something about the pattern tugged at me. When he came home that night, kicked off his shoes and loosened his tie, I held the bill up. "What's this number?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He glanced at the page for less than a second. "Work," he said. "Supplier. They're in a different time zone. We have to call at odd hours." He kissed my cheek on his way to the shower. "Boring stuff. Don't waste your pretty head on it." The phrase should have annoyed me more than it did. Instead, I folded the bill and slipped it into a drawer, telling myself I was overthinking. Months later, when I cleaned out that drawer, I found it again. The circled number stared back at me. I almost threw the bill away, but something stopped me. I took an empty shoebox from the top of the wardrobe, dropped the folded paper inside, and closed the lid. "Just in case," I muttered to myself. I didn't yet know what case I was preparing for. The box was harmless at first. One bill, one circled number, one little whisper of doubt. Then came the photo. It was a few years later. I was tidying his desk, something he always said he appreciated because
he was hopeless with papers, when a small photograph slipped out from between two folders and fluttered to the floor. I bent to pick it up. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7, grinned up at me from the glossy paper. He was standing in a park, ice cream smeared all over his cheeks, holding a cone in one hand and waving with the other. On his wrist, a small blue bracelet with a silver charm caught the sunlight. The boy's eyes, his chin, the way his smile pulled to one side, they were achingly familiar. My stomach flipped. Before I could process, my husband walked in. His gaze snapped to the photo in my hand. "Oh," he said too quickly, snatching it from me with a forced chuckle. "That. My colleague's son. He left it on my desk. Cute, isn't he? I keep forgetting to give it back." He slipped the photo into his briefcase with a practiced ease that at the time I didn't recognize as practiced. I stood there, staring at the empty spot where the photo had been. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it really was a colleague's child. Maybe my imagination was making connections that didn't exist. Maybe I was just tired. When he left for work the next morning, I opened his desk drawer and found another copy of the phone bill with that same number. I felt something inside me twist. The shoebox came out from the back of the wardrobe again. I added a note on a torn piece of paper. Photo of boy with bracelet. Colleague's son? I dropped it in. At first I told myself I was being ridiculous. What kind of wife keeps a box like this? What did I hope to do? Build a case against the man I loved? The man who had held my hand when our children were born? Who had rubbed my back when my mother died? Who had carried me to bed when I sprained my ankle? I almost threw the box away so many times. I would hold it in my hands, feel its lightness, and think, this is nothing. I'm making something out of nothing. Then I would remember the perfume on his shirt that one night, the unexplained overnight trip, the way he had overcompensated with gifts afterwards. And I would put the box back. Years passed, life continued. School meetings, dentist appointments, birthdays, anniversaries. Our children grew, left home, built lives of their own. On the surface, our marriage looked steady. From the outside, we could have been a picture in a frame sold in a furniture store. Inside, though, that box was slowly filling. A neighbor's comment here, a misplaced receipt there, little things. Once Mrs. Novak from 2 streets over mentioned seeing my husband on the other side of town a few evenings in a row. "He must have a project there," she said casually, always rushing that one. "Good man, hard worker, but you should tell him to rest. He looked torn." There was that word again. I smiled, thanked her, made some joke about men never knowing when to stop. Then that night, I wrote it down on a slip of paper. Novak saw him across town 3 times this week. Rushing. Evening. Into the box it went. Sometimes the evidence came not from what he did, but from what he didn't do. The way he never wanted me to come near his briefcase, the way he insisted on picking up the mail himself, the way his phone was always locked, always face down, always accompanied by a quick, guilty glance when it lit up. I told myself, if you trust him, you don't look. And if you look, you must be ready for the consequences. For years, that thought kept my hands away from his phone, his emails, his social media, but it didn't stop me from noticing. It was a slow awakening, not a sharp, dramatic moment, but a series of small cuts that eventually made me bleed. The turning point came one night, about 5 years ago. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, too large without the children's noise. He was snoring lightly beside me, his back turned. The glow from the street lamp outside carved his profile into the darkness. Something in me snapped. I got up, walked to the living room, and opened his briefcase. My hands shook, but this time I didn't stop them. Inside, I found many things I expected: work documents, pens, an old sandwich wrapper, and then, tucked into a side pocket, an envelope. There were bank statements, a second account, not ours. Regular transfers every month to the same person, different amounts, sometimes larger, around school holidays, around Christmas. The name on the statements was one I did not know, but the town printed beneath it was the same Mrs. Novak had mentioned, the same part of the city he had projects in, the same direction he always went when he had late meetings. I sat at the table staring at those numbers, those dates. I wasn't an idiot. Money doesn't move like that without a story attached. I took out my own notebook and wrote, "Second account, regular transfers, hidden." Then, for the first time, I didn't just drop the papers into the box. I began to arrange them. Old phone bills, a few printed screen-captured texts I'd glimpsed when he left his phone unlocked on the counter. "I'll make it up to you. Next week, I promise. Don't be angry, please." With no names attached, but enough to sting. I printed copies of whatever I thought might disappear. I made notes of dates, places, small details. I even wrote down my own feelings on some nights. Short entries like, "He called at 11:40 p.m., said he was working, sounded tired. I heard laughter in the background. Canceled our dinner, said client emergency, came home with a new scarf for me, wrong color. Asked if he believes in soulmates. He laughed uncomfortably, changed the subject." Each entry marked a moment when the veil thinned and I glimpsed something I didn't want to see. And I still stayed. Maybe that's the hardest part to admit. Not that he lied, but that I helped him by looking away. I wasn't stupid. I was afraid. Afraid of being alone at 50, then 55, now at 58. Afraid of telling our children their father was not the hero I painted him as. Afraid of becoming the divorced woman in our circle, the one everyone whispers about. So instead of confronting him, I prepared. I met with a lawyer once under the pretense of checking something about the house deed. I left his office with a folder full of information about what my rights would be if I ever decided to walk away. I added his business card to the box as well. It became my insurance policy, my silent companion, my way of saying to myself, "You are not crazy. You are not imagining this. If the day comes, you will not be empty-handed." And now here that day was. In the living room, with his other family sitting on my sofa and my untouched birthday cake behind me, I slowly untied the white ribbon. "No," he said suddenly, leaning forward, panic flaring in his eyes. "But you have to."
For a heartbeat after I said, "It's my turn to choose," the room went utterly still. Then, like a dam cracking, the silence didn't shatter into screaming. It fractured into something more dangerous. Everyone speaking from their own wound. My husband was the first. "Why didn't you say anything?" he blurted, leaning forward as if the answer might save him. His eyes were wide, frantic, darting between the box and my face. "All these years, you were collecting all this? Watching? Knowing? And you never confronted me? We could have what?" I cut in quietly, lifting my gaze to his. Negotiated how much truth I clenched. He looked like a man who had rehearsed 100 excuses and suddenly found all of them useless. "You don't understand," he tried again, voice rising. "If you'd told me you knew, if you'd just said something, I could have ended this earlier. I could have made different choices. We could have worked through it together, the way couples do." "Couples," I repeated in my head. "Plural. How fitting." Aloud I said, "It's interesting you say that. Did it ever occur to you, in 30 years, to give me the information I needed so I could decide whether I wanted to work through having a husband with a second family? Or was that decision yours alone?" He flinched, staring at me as if seeing someone new. Across from him, Anna let out a bitter laugh that sounded like it had been stuck in her throat for years. "Don't put this on her," she snapped, turning toward him. "You told me she was fragile, that she needed you, that you couldn't leave because she would fall apart. You used her as a shield for your own cowardice. You said she can't handle this. You said she's too soft, too traditional, it would break her. And now she's sitting here, with a box full of your lies, calmer than either of us." He stared at her, stunned. "Anna, No," she cut him off, her voice shaking. "You don't get to be wounded now. Do you know what it's like to be the secret for 3 decades? To hide photos, to introduce you as a friend of the family to our neighbors, to tell the children not to post pictures with you online because it's complicated. You wanted to be a good man in every house, so you made sure neither house had the full man." The young man shifted, anger tightening his shoulders. "You both lied," he said suddenly, his voice rough, "to us and to her. For years. You told us it was complicated. You told us you were working. You told Mom," he glanced at Anna, "that you were doing it for us, that you stayed with your wife for us. And now I'm sitting here looking at her and realizing you never gave any of us a choice." He turned to Anna, betrayal etched in his features. "And you," he added, softer but just as sharp, "you told us to be patient. You told us not to push him. You said he was doing his best. But you knew he was lying to her. You watched him walk out of his house and back into hers, and you still told us to understand." Anna's face crumpled for a moment. "I was trying to protect you. What was I supposed to say? Your father is a coward, but we're going to live off his cowardice anyway? You were children. I was terrified he would leave and never come back at all." The young woman, who had been silent until then, lifted her head. Her voice trembled, but there was steel underneath. "We didn't ask to be born in a secret," she said quietly. Her words landed like a stone on a glass table. She looked at her father, then at me, then at her mother. "All my life, I've learned to edit myself, to crop photos so you weren't in them, to lie to my friends about why my uncle looked so much like me. I watched Mom wait by the window for your car. I watched you rush out of our house on holidays to be somewhere else. I knew there was another life, I just didn't know it had recipes and framed photos and a cake waiting on the counter." She looked at me again, eyes brimming. "I hated you when I was younger," she admitted softly. "I thought you were the enemy, the reason he couldn't stay, the woman he chose instead of us." Her voice wavered. "Now I realize he never really chose anyone. He chose himself." Her clarity, spoken through tears, cut deeper than any accusation could. I felt something inside me twist painfully, but I refused to let it show on my face. I had decided, the moment I took that box out, that I would not give anyone in that room the satisfaction of calling me hysterical. Society is always ready to forgive a man his tears and blame a woman for hers. I would not make it easy for them. I took a slow breath. "I'm not calm," I said quietly. "I'm controlled. There's a difference. Right now, I'm choosing not to fall apart in front of you. That doesn't mean I'm not broken inside." My husband swallowed, his voice barely audible now. What are you going to do?" he asked. "Are you going to leave me? Are you going to tell everyone? The kids? Our families? My work?" There it was, the fear at the center of him. Exposure, consequences, loss of control. I looked at the clock. Only an hour or two had passed since the doorbell rang, but it felt like days. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I know what I feel. I know what you've done. I know what they've suffered and what I've lost." I gestured toward the box. "I've spent years gathering these truths. I'm not going to make a decision about the rest of my life in front of a half-eaten fruit bowl and an uncut cake." He flinched at the word "rest of my life," as if he expected me to frame everything in terms of our life forever. "I need time," I said firmly, "to think, to talk to our children, to breathe without all of you watching me like I'm a bomb about to explode." Anna nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. "That's fair," she murmured. "We shouldn't have come like this. Not today, not like this." I looked at her, then at the two young adults, and felt a wave of exhaustion crash over me. There was only so much of other people's pain I could hold in one day. "I'm going to ask you to leave now," I said gently, but clearly. "All of you." My husband jolted. "What, you're throwing me out?" "I'm asking you to leave my house," I clarified. "For today. For as long as it takes me to decide what I can live with and what I can't. You can go to a hotel, to wherever you've been going all these years, but you will not sleep under my roof tonight as if nothing has changed." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped when he saw my face. Something in my expression must have told him this was not a debate. "I'll call you,"
he said weakly. Please answer. Don't shut me out completely. I didn't promise him anything. I turned to Anna and the children. I should go too, I said softly. This was a lot for one day. I'm sure you need space as much as I do. The young woman nodded quickly, eyes red. The young man stood up slowly, as if his legs were made of lead. Anna rose last. She looked at me for a long moment. I know it doesn't mean much coming from me, she said, voice thick. But I'm sorry for my part in this, for the years you lost without knowing you were sharing him, for the nights you waited like I waited. She hesitated, then added, I think we were both told a story that suited him and hurt us. I held her gaze. We were, I agreed. I walked them to the hallway, the same hallway where, not so long ago, they had stood on my doorstep as strangers. Now they were leaving as something else. Not family, not enemies, something in between. People whose lives had brushed against mine in a way none of us had chosen. My husband lingered by the door, looking at me as if trying to memorize my face. Please, he whispered, don't do anything drastic. Don't make decisions in anger. I almost smiled at the irony. Don't worry, I said calmly. I've been living with the consequences of your decisions for 30 years. I won't rush mine. He lowered his head and stepped out, the other three following. I watched them walk down the path, Anna's hand on her daughter's arm, the young man slightly ahead, my husband trailing behind. 4 figures bound by a secret I had finally allowed to step into the light. The door closed with a soft click that sounded to me like the end of a chapter. I stood there for a moment, forehead resting lightly against the wood, breathing in the quiet. The house felt different, yes, emptier, but also strangely honest for the first time in decades. No more invisible guests, no more unasked questions hovering in the corners. I turned back to the living room. The box still sat on the table, open, its contents spilling slightly over the edge. The cake on the counter waited patiently, candles unused. I walked over, picked up one of my old notes, and read my own handwriting from years ago. He's late again. Says traffic. Feels like something is slipping away from me, but I don't know what. Now I knew. As I sank into the chair, the weight of everything finally pressed down on me. My chest ached, my throat burned, and my eyes stung. I let one tear slip down, then another, tracing their way slowly over the lines time had drawn on my face. The real war, I realized, looking at the empty doorway where they had just stood, was never between us women. It was inside me, between the part that loved him and the part that loved myself.
The first night after they left, the house felt too big for my breathing. His side of the bed stayed perfectly smooth, the sheet cool and untouched, while mine was a tangle of fabric and thoughts. The dent where his body had rested for 30 years seemed to stare at me accusingly in the half-dark, like a ghost that refused to fade just because the man himself wasn't there. I lay on my back, eyes open, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling as car lights passed outside. The silence pressed in on me, thick and unfamiliar. It wasn't that we'd talked so much, he and I, not in recent years, but even quiet feels different depending on who isn't in it anymore. At some point, I rolled to his side and lay my hand on his pillow. It smelled faintly of his shampoo, that familiar mix of mint and something woody. For a moment, grief hit me like a wave, not just for the man he had been, but for the woman I had been beside him, the one who believed in a life that now turned out to be half imagined. Did I love him? I wondered silently. Or did I love the idea of not being left? It was an ugly question, but it refused to go away. The next morning, I woke early, though I had barely slept. Habit pulled me to the kitchen. Fill the kettle, take down 2 cups, set them on the counter.
My hands moved automatically, muscle memory stronger than reality. I caught myself just before pouring into the second cup. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty porcelain, the steam rising from the kettle. Then I took the extra cup and put it back in the cupboard, slowly, as if I were folding away an old piece of clothing that no longer fit. Tea for one. The sound of it in my head made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I carried my mug to the living room and sat on the sofa, the box on the coffee table still half open. I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, my eyes were drawn to the shelf above the TV, where our family photos lined up in chronological, dishonest perfection. I picked one up at random, our son's 18th birthday. There we were, him with his silly paper hat, me laughing, our daughter pretending to shove cake in our brother's face. My husband stood behind us, hands on our shoulders, smiling as if nothing in his life were split in two. I remembered that day. He almost missed it. Urgent meeting, he'd said that morning. I'll try my best, but don't wait for me to cut the cake. I'd smiled tightly, told the kids, Dad's busy, but he'll come if he can. I did what I always did, softened his absence with excuses, wrapped it in understanding so it wouldn't scratch their hearts. He'd arrived halfway through, slightly breathless, tie loosened, brandishing a gift for our son. Everyone had cheered. I'd kissed him on the cheek, grateful he'd made it. Now, looking at that photo, I wondered, whose birthday had he almost missed on the other side of town? Or whose had he left early to arrive at ours just in time for the pictures? How much of my silence was love and how much was fear? Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over when the world around us whispered that a woman's value shrinks with every passing year. Fear of telling our children that their father was not the unshakable foundation I'd painted him as. I put the photo back and picked up another. A holiday at the seaside. The kids were younger, grinning with sunburned noses, buckets and shovels in hand. I remembered that trip vividly, not because of the fun, but because of the way he'd taken so many phone calls on the balcony. Clients don't rest, he joked, phone pressed to his ear, looking out at the waves. I sat on the bed, sunscreen in my hands, listening to him murmur into the receiver, I miss you too, followed by a long pause, then, I'll make it up to you, I promise. Back then, I had told myself he was talking to a client or a colleague, because the alternative felt like a punch I wasn't ready to receive. Now, I knew better. Now, when I closed my eyes, I could see Anna in some modest apartment, sitting on a secondhand sofa, phone in hand, listening to that same promise, waiting for the day when I'll make it up to you turned into something more than an apology bouquet and an envelope of cash slipped into her hand. I set the photos down and leaned back, closing my eyes. I imagined her life, nights sitting by the window, glancing at the clock, counting the minutes between his messages. Holidays where she set an extra place at the table that remained empty until dessert, if he came at all, telling the children, Daddy is busy, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We had both been, in our own ways, wardens and prisoners of the same man's choices. He had built a prison of lies and expectations, and we, taught to endure, to understand, to sacrifice, had decorated ourselves with love, with routines, with excuses, convincing ourselves it was enough. In my generation, we were raised on a steady diet of endurance. My mother had stayed with my father through financial hardship, through illness, through his temper. She had worn her loyalty like armor. A good woman, she often said, doesn't leave. She stands by her husband no matter what. Love is not just feelings, it's duty. Duty. That word had echoed in my head so many times over the years. When he was late, when he was distant, when he was physically present but emotionally elsewhere. I gave him my youth, I thought now, hands wrapped around my mug,
my time, my care. I built a home around his needs, his dreams, his schedule. Do I also have to give him my old age after this? The idea felt like a weight settling on my chest. In the days that followed, time seemed to melt and stretch. Mornings slipped into afternoon, into evening, into night, without the usual markers of shared meals and casual conversation. I cooked small portions now, one plate, one fork. I ate at the table alone, the chair opposite me empty. Sometimes I would catch myself glancing at the door at the usual time he used to come home, my heart doing that stupid, hopeful jump before the rational part of my brain reminded it that this was deliberate, my choice, for now. Our children called, sensing something in my voice, even though I hadn't told them the full story yet. "Are you okay, Mom?" our daughter asked one afternoon. "You sound tired." "I am tired," I answered honestly, "but I'm also thinking. I'll tell you when I'm ready, all right?" She hesitated, but didn't push. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time, wondering how I would condense 30 years of half-truths into a conversation that wouldn't shatter their memory of their father completely. On the third or fourth day, time had become blurry. I called my oldest friend, Elena. We met at a cafe, a small place we'd been going to for years, the kind with chipped cups and a waiter who recognized us on sight. She took one look at me and knew. "What happened?" she demanded before the coffee even arrived. So, I told her. Not everything, not every detail of the box and the bank statements, but enough. The other family, the 30 years, the birthday confession. Her face darkened as I spoke. By the time I had finished, her hands were balled into fists on the table. "You should throw him out," she said flatly. "Today. Change the locks, call a lawyer, take half of everything, and let him crawl back to whatever mess he made elsewhere." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the little whirlpool form. "If life were that simple," I said quietly, "we wouldn't be talking now." She frowned. "What's complicated about this? He lied, he cheated, he lived 2 lives. You don't stay with a man like that." "Maybe not," I said, "but I also don't know how to be without him." She frowned deeper. "You're strong. You can do it." I sighed. Strength isn't the issue. It's history. It's the fact that my whole adult life has his shadow in it. Every photo on my wall, every memory of our children growing up, every routine I have. It's one thing to say leave. It's another to actually walk out of the story you thought you were living and start from page 1 at nearly 60. Elena reached across the table and took my hand. "You won't be starting from page 1, she said. "You'll be starting from page whatever this is, with all the pages behind you making you wiser." I smiled faintly. "That's one way to look at it." She squeezed my fingers. "Whatever you decide," she said, "make sure it's for you. Not for appearances, not for the children, not for what people will say. For you. For me." It felt like a foreign concept and a familiar longing at once. That night, back home, I opened the box again. Beneath the papers and photos, there was another layer most people wouldn't expect. Legal documents I had gathered quietly over the last few years. A copy of the house deed with both our names on it. Notes from my meeting with the lawyer. A draft of a separation agreement I'd never had the courage to bring up. A will I'd rewritten in secret, adjusting how my portion of our assets would be divided.
In the end, I chose my own living room for the final conversation. I thought about neutral places, a cafe, a lawyer's office, some anonymous conference room with bad lighting and worse coffee. But something in me resisted the idea of discussing the future of my life in a place where I was a guest. Whatever else had been taken from me, this house was the one battlefield where I would not surrender home ground. So I called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight. "Hello?" "It's me," I said. "Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" A small, stunned pause. "Yes."
Of course. Bring them, I added. Anna and the children. He hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe we should talk alone first. We could... No, I said gently, but firmly. All of us. At 3. He exhaled slowly. Okay, we'll be there. I could hear the cautious hope in his voice, like a man who has been standing in the rain and suddenly sees a porch light flick on in the distance. I didn't correct it. Hope or fear, it didn't matter. The decision was already made. The next day, the house was quiet and clean. I straightened the cushions, not because I cared what impression I made, but because order calmed me. The box sat on the coffee table again, the lid closed now, ribbon tied nicely. This time, there was no birthday cake on the counter, no flowers, just the faint scent of polish and tea. At exactly 3, the doorbell rang. I walked down the hallway, my steps steady. When I opened the door, they were standing there much as before. Anna on the left, the young man and woman beside her, my husband a step behind them. But something had changed in all their faces. The shock had dulled into a wary, exhausted alertness. They looked like people who had spent days replaying their lines, afraid of saying the wrong thing in the next act. Come in, I said calmly. They entered quietly. No one tried to make small talk. We all knew this wasn't that kind of visit. We sat as we had the first time, Anna and her children on the sofa, my husband in the armchair, and I on the smaller chair opposite, the box between us like a neutral third party. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I drew a breath. I have listened to your truth, I began, my voice low but clear. Now, I'll tell you mine. My husband shifted, leaning forward slightly. Whatever you decide. I held up a hand. Let me finish. He sank back, lips pressed together. I spent the last weeks not just crying, not just remembering, but thinking about my life, about what I want from the years I have left, about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself. I rested my hand gently on the box. You saw some of what's inside here last time, evidence that I knew more than you thought, but you didn't see all of it. I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Calmly, methodically, I took out a few items and placed them on the table. First, a stack of papers, old bills, bank statements, printouts. These, I said, are the trails you left behind. Phone calls, transfers, little breadcrumbs of your double life. I'm not putting them here to shame you in front of them. She nodded toward Anna and the children. But to make it clear that we will never again argue about whether this happened. There is no room for denial. No space for rewriting history. This is what you did. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the papers. Next, I took out a thinner folder, newer, less worn. And this, I went on, is what I did. I opened it and slid a few pages toward him. A draft separation agreement, notes from the lawyer, a list of assets and how they might be divided. His hands hovered over the papers without touching them, as if they were hot. I met with a lawyer 2 years ago, not because I was ready to leave then, but because I needed to know I had options. I needed to know that if I ever reached the point I am at now, I wouldn't be walking into the dark. He looked up at me, stunned. 2 years ago? Yes, I replied. While you were still telling yourself I was too fragile to handle the truth, I was quietly learning what my life could look like without you. I saw it then, the crack, the moment his last assumption broke. For 30 years, he had imagined me as someone clinging to his version of reality, too delicate to survive its collapse. Now, he was being forced to see me as something entirely different. A woman who had been preparing for the possibility of leaving even as she stayed. I continued,
my voice steady. I have thought about this carefully. I have weighed the pain of staying against the pain of leaving. Neither option is easy. Both will hurt. But one of them requires me to keep betraying myself every day, and the other one asks me to betray you only once. I let that sink in. I am choosing not to betray myself anymore. The room held its breath. I am filing for separation, I said, the words surprisingly light in my mouth. Anna blinked, her lips parting. The young woman covered her mouth with her hand. The young man closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing for impact. My husband stared at me as if I had spoken another language. You want a divorce? He stammered. After everything? After all these years? We could still patch over the cracks? I interrupted gently. We could hire a therapist, cry in an office once a week, talk about trust while I know exactly how little it meant to you. No. I shook my head. I'm not interested in pretending we can rebuild something from a foundation that was never truly ours. You had 30 years to choose honesty with me. You didn't. I'm choosing honesty with myself now. He looked desperate, almost childlike. But we have a life, a house, children, memories. We've built so much together. You can't just throw it away. I'm not throwing it away, I said softly. I'm acknowledging what it always was. Our children are not lies. The love I felt for you was not a lie. The meals, the hugs, the laughter. That was real for me. But the context in which they existed was incomplete. You hid a whole other life from me. That rots everything else, whether you meant it to or not. I turned to Anna and the children, wanting to be clear. My anger is with him, I said. You don't have to carry his guilt. They looked at me, unsure. You owe me nothing, I continued. You didn't stand in front of me in a white dress and promise exclusivity. You didn't look me in the eye and say, for as long as we both shall live, while calculating how to keep another family out of sight. You were living with your own half-truths, your own disappointments. If I stay angry forever, it will be at him, and only him. Anna exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and sorrow. I never expected you, she began, then stopped. I always thought if you found out, you'd want to destroy us, take him away from us, punish us. I thought that too, once, in the abstract, in the what-if fantasies I had when I was feeling particularly hurt. But now that we're here, I see something else. You and I were both living lives designed around his convenience. I won't keep playing that role, not by attacking you, and not by clinging to him. My husband shook his head slowly, as if trying to dislodge the words. What about us, our children? Where does this leave us? I met his gaze. It leaves you, I said gently, with a father who will no longer be split in two. Whatever relationship you have with him now will be honest, for the first time. That's more than I ever had. He looked away, blinking rapidly. The young woman swallowed. And you, she asked me, won't you be lonely? Her question was so simple, so naked, that it pierced me. I let myself feel it. I pictured the quiet mornings, the single cup of tea, the empty side of the bed. Then I pictured something else. Sleeping without wondering who he was texting, eating dinner without rehearsing how to mask the hurt of his latest absence, living a life that might be smaller, but not hollow. I will be alone sometimes, I said honestly, but I've been lonely for years. This way, at least my loneliness will be honest too, and I'll have something I haven't had in a long time. What? She asked. Self-respect, I replied. The word settled into the room with a quiet authority that nothing else had carried. My husband looked broken then, shoulders slumped, hands shaking slightly. "So this is it," he whispered. "You're really—"
The apartment I live in now is smaller than the house we shared, but it feels more honest. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony with chipped paint, a kitchen just big enough for one person to cook without bumping into anyone else. When I first moved in, the emptiness echoed. No familiar creak of his shoes in the hallway, no low hum of the television he always left on as background noise. Just the ticking of a clock and the sound of my own breathing. I kept some things from the old house, a few framed photos of the children, my favorite armchair, the teapot my mother gave me as a wedding gift. I didn't bring our wedding portrait. That stayed behind. Another artifact from a story that no longer defined my future. The first night here, I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark, waiting for the familiar knot of anxiety, the one that used to tighten in my chest when he was late, when his phone was off, when some part of me knew he was somewhere he hadn't told me about. It didn't come. There was pain, yes, a deep, dull ache where 30 years of habit had lived. But the constant buzzing of confusion, the endless calculations of, is he really where he says he is? Those were gone. I realized with a start that I was breathing more deeply than I had in years. Legally, the separation is moving forward. The house is on the market, our accounts are being divided. There have been meetings with lawyers, signatures, numbers on paper that represent not just money, but time, effort, and countless compromises made over 3 decades. It is both clinical and heartbreaking. Practically, our relationship has been reduced to its simplest form. 2 adults who share grown children and a shared past, but no longer share a life. When we speak now, it is polite, measured. We talk about logistics. Our son wants to come for dinner on Sunday. Our daughter's car needs repairs. The notary appointment is at 10. We do not talk about feelings, about regrets, about what-ifs. That part of us is over. I no longer look at him for emotional validation. That was the hardest habit to break. When something good happens, a small success, a funny moment, a piece of news, the impulse to reach for the phone and tell him still flickers sometimes. But then I remember he's no longer the person I celebrate with first. Instead, I call my sister, or Elena, or sometimes I just sit with the moment alone, letting the joy be mine without needing someone else to confirm it. We have boundaries now, clear and hard-won. We agreed that he doesn't visit my apartment unannounced. If we need to meet, it's in public places or at one of the children's homes. He can call, but if I don't answer, he doesn't keep ringing. Messages stay practical. No late-night confessions, no "I miss you" sent in moments of weakness. Holidays are the hardest, but even there we've found something resembling structure. We decided, together and with our children's input, that we will not force them to choose sides. Some events we attend together, birthdays, graduations, important milestones. We are civil in the same room, standing on opposite sides of the table, talking to the same grandchildren. Other times, we alternate. One Christmas with me, one New Year's with him. Our children are adults. They manage their calendars. I don't ask where he spends the days I don't see him. It's not my business anymore. As for his other family, our involvement is cautious, respectful, limited. We are not a blended family, and I don't pretend we ever will be, but there have been crossings of paths. A graduation, a hospital visit when he fell ill briefly and all his children, both sets, showed up, awkward, and united by concern. In those moments, we behaved like people who understand that life is messy and that punishing the young for the sins of the old is easy but cruel. I keep my distance, but I don't sharpen my tongue. They, in turn, respect my space. We nod, we exchange small words. Once, the young woman, the one that asked if I'd be lonely, emailed me to ask about a recipe she remembered from that first day.
She wrote shyly, "You make the kind of soup that tastes like someone thought about you while they cooked." It made me cry in the quiet of my kitchen. Then I sent her the recipe. Emotionally, I am still healing. There are days when I feel light, almost giddy with the realization that I can plan an afternoon without subconsciously checking if it lines up with his schedule. There are also days when a random song or a familiar smell sends me back to a shared memory, and I feel grief clamp around my ribs. But the confusion, the dissonance between what I felt and what I suspected, is gone. What hurts now is clean pain, not the infected wound of being lied to daily. I pour more of myself into things I had quietly abandoned over the years. I started taking a painting class at the community center. My hands are clumsy, my flowers look like they're melting, but when I stand in front of a canvas, I forget for a little while that I was ever someone's wife. I am just a woman with a brush and colors, making something that exists for no one's approval but her own. Elena drags me out for walks and occasional dinners. Sometimes I protest, saying I'd rather stay home, but more often now I say yes. And when I say no, it's because I genuinely want a quiet night to myself, not because I'm waiting for someone who may or may not come home. Small victories show up in surprising places. Like the day he called and asked, almost casually, "Could you do me a favor and handle the reminder at the bank? You're better with these things." I felt the old automatic response rise up, "Of course, I'll handle it. I always handle it." Then I stopped myself. "No," I said calmly. "That's your responsibility. You can do it." There was a pause on the line, then a soft, resigned, "All right." I hung up and stood there, phone in hand, feeling disproportionately proud. It was such a small thing to say no to one more task I used to take on without thinking. But it felt like reclaiming a piece of energy I'd been giving away for years without even knowing it.
If you're still here with me listening to all of this, maybe you recognize a little of yourself in my story. Maybe you've never had a husband show up on your birthday with a hidden family. That particular cruelty is rare, I hope. But perhaps you know what it feels like to sense that something is wrong and swallow it. To feel the weight of secrets you didn't ask to carry. To be loyal to someone who isn't fully loyal to you. I want to talk to you now, woman to woman, not as a victim, not as a saint, but as someone who has been both blind and clear-eyed, both small and strong. When I look back, the first truth that stands out is this: love without self-respect becomes self-destruction. I loved my husband. That part is undeniable. I loved our children, our routines, even our arguments because they felt like proof that we had something real. But somewhere along the way, my love became a reason to shrink myself. I accepted less honesty than I deserved. I interpreted crumbs as banquets. I let "he's tired, he's stressed, he's busy" become reasons to ignore the quiet voice inside me saying, "This doesn't feel right." I told myself that silence was peace. But now I know silence can feel like peace, but often it is just postponed pain. When you don't ask questions because you're afraid of the answers, the questions don't disappear, they sink deeper. When you don't set boundaries because you fear being alone, you don't avoid loneliness, you just experience it in someone else's shadow. People sometimes ask me, "Do you regret staying so long?" I've thought about that a lot. Regret is a heavy coat to wear, especially as we get older. What I can say is this: I regret every time I gaslit myself. Every time I told my heart to hush because I wanted the appearance of stability more than the reality of truth. Every time I chose his comfort over my clarity. But I don't regret the moment I finally chose myself, even though it came late. It is never too late to choose yourself. Not at 50, not at 60, not at any age.
We have this cruel idea, especially for women, that there is an expiration date on starting over, that after a certain birthday, your job is to endure, to make do, to be grateful for whatever you have, even if it's hurting you. I believed that for a long time. The day I took out that box and put it on the table, I was 58 years old. Some people might say, why now? Why not 20 years ago? But here's what I learned. The right time to choose yourself is the moment you realize that not choosing yourself is killing you slowly. A marriage is not just a ceremony. It's a daily choice of honesty. We talk so much about the wedding day, the dress, the photos, the rings, but almost nothing about the quiet, everyday decisions that either honor or betray those vows. Cheating isn't just about bodies. It's about stories. The stories you tell, the ones you hide, the way you decide for someone else what version of reality they're allowed to live in. My husband betrayed me long before he slept in another bed. He betrayed me when he decided I couldn't handle the truth, when he chose to manage my life instead of sharing his whole life with me. We can't control who betrays us, but we can control who we become after the betrayal. I could have become bitter, closed, suspicious of everyone. I could have spent the rest of my life saying all men are the same, wearing my pain like armor and swinging it at anyone who came close. I won't lie. There were days when that temptation was strong. But in the quiet of my new apartment, with my life neatly divided into before and after, I realized I didn't want the betrayal to be the most interesting thing about me. I didn't want to be the woman who was lied to for 30 years. I wanted to be the woman who, after 30 years of lies, finally told herself the truth and acted on it. If you are listening to this and tolerating disrespect because you are afraid of loneliness, I want to say this as clearly as I can. You are not too old to start over. You are not silly for wanting honesty. You are not asking for too much when you ask for faithfulness, transparency, respect. Those are not luxuries. They are the basic ingredients of a relationship between equals. And if the person you are with makes you feel like your standards are unreasonable, it might be because they are committed to staying unreasonable themselves. I also want to acknowledge something important. Choosing yourself doesn't always mean leaving. For some women, the bravest thing that can do is walk away. For others, the bravest thing is to stay, but with new terms, real boundaries, therapy, full disclosure, and the constant possibility of leaving if those conditions aren't met. Only you know which path honors your dignity more. What matters is not whether you stay or go. What matters is whether you disappear in the process. If you're watching this in a house that feels more like a stage than a home, pretending everything is fine while your heart quietly breaks, I see you. If you're scrolling in bed next to someone you no longer trust, wondering if you're crazy for feeling what you feel, you're not. Your intuition is not your enemy. It's the part of you that remembers who you were before you learned to make yourself small. I used to believe that being the bigger person meant forgiving endlessly, understanding endlessly, bending endlessly. Now I believe that sometimes being the bigger person means finally saying, enough. Enough lying, enough minimizing, enough carrying the emotional weight for both of you. So now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and tried to rebuild? Would you have left earlier? Would you have done something entirely different? There is no single right answer. There is only the answer that lets you look in the mirror and recognize yourself. If you feel safe sharing, tell me in the comments. Not for gossip, not for drama, but because your story might be the hand another woman needs to see reaching back from the dark. Maybe there's someone out there, sitting at her own table with her own box of doubts,
phone screenshots, odd receipts, half-overheard conversations, and she doesn't know if she's being paranoid or perceptive. Maybe your words can help her trust herself a little more. And if stories like this make you feel a little less alone, if they help you see your own life more clearly, consider subscribing, liking, or sharing this video. Not for me, my story is already lived, but for the quiet woman who might see it on her screen at midnight and realize, I'm not the only one, and I'm not crazy. I want to leave you with one last image. Imagine a small cake on a simple table. No big party, no crowd, just a woman, a few candles, maybe a child or a friend by her side, or maybe no one at all, except her own reflection in the window. She lights the candles. She doesn't wish for someone to stay this time. She doesn't wish for someone to change. She doesn't even wish for the past to be different. She closes her eyes and wishes for one thing: the courage to keep choosing herself every day in small and big ways. Then she blows out the candles, not mourning, not pretending everything is perfect, but quietly, stubbornly, hopeful. This year, for the first time, my birthday gift was my own courage.